The world of magic doesn't end with the turning of a page. Love rises and falls anew, forbidden like poison or blazing like a phoenix's flame. The heroes we thought we knew uncover their hearts once more. So step into the enchantment of emotion and welcome to a world where love is written anew. The village of Godric's Hollow was quiet that summer, the kind of quiet that settled not in peace, but in waiting. The air hung heavy with the scent of warm grass and honeysuckle, and though the sun shone bright, shadows lingered beneath the Dumbledore house. Inside, Albus Dumbledore sat by the window of the upper room, a book open on his knees, though he had not read a word in hours. His quill lay beside him, the ink long dried. The letters on the page blurred before his eyes, not because of tears, but because his thoughts were elsewhere, wandering, restless, trapped. It had been only weeks since his mother's funeral. Kendra Dumbledore's stern voice no longer echoed through the halls, and the silence she left behind was unbearable. Albus, at 19, had always been brilliant beyond his years, but brilliance was a poor companion to grief. Now he found himself burdened with responsibility. His sister Ariana, frail and unstable, and his younger brother Aberforth, angry and impatient with the world. He longed to leave, to return to his studies, to prove himself to the world as the scholar he was destined to be. But he could not. His mother's dying wish bound him to that little cottage, to watch over the sister who could no longer control her magic, whose gentle moods could turn dangerous without warning. Aberforth did his best, caring for Ariana with a stubborn devotion, yet he resented Albus for dreaming beyond their home. "You've got your books," Aberforth had said one night, his voice sharp as broken glass. "But I've got her. Don't pretend you understand what it's like." And perhaps he was right. Albus did not understand. He loved Ariana deeply, but his heart was restless. He wanted something, though he could not name what. A spark, a purpose, something more than the confines of his own brilliance. Then, one afternoon, that something arrived. It came in the form of a stranger with golden hair and a knowing smile, walking up the path to Bathilda Bagshot's ivy-covered home next door. The old historian had mentioned once that her great-nephew would be visiting from abroad, a prodigy expelled from Durmstrang of all places. His name, she had said, was Gellert Grindelwald. Albus had paid little attention at the time. But now, as he glanced out his window and saw the boy stepping lightly across the garden path, sunlight catching in his hair, curiosity sparked like flint striking steel. That evening, Bathilda appeared at their door, her eyes bright. "My nephew has heard of your talents, dear boy," she said to Albus, her tone full of warmth and mischief. "He's quite as clever as you, I dare say. You should meet. You might find yourselves kindred spirits." Albus smiled politely, though his heart gave an unexpected leap. When he met Gellert the next morning, that leap became something far greater. The boy was unlike anyone he had ever known. Tall, with sharp features softened by charm, his voice carried both confidence and mystery. His eyes were bright as blue glass, eyes that seemed to look straight through pretense and into thought itself. "You're the Albus Dumbledore," Gellert said with a grin that felt both teasing and sincere. "Bathilda's told me everything. A mind like yours must be dreadfully wasted here." Albus, usually quick with words, found himself caught off guard. "I have responsibilities," he replied carefully. "Responsibilities," Gellert repeated, as though testing the sound. Or chains. The word lingered between them. Albus should have dismissed it, but instead he smiled. Perhaps a bit of both. They spent that day walking through the fields at the edge of the village, their conversation tumbling from spell theory to wizarding history to philosophy. Every idea Albus had ever held felt sharper, brighter when reflected in Gellert's quicksilver mind. He had found someone who not only understood his thoughts, but challenged them, expanded them. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the hills, Gellert said softly, "You believe the world could be better, don't you?" "I believe it must be," Albus answered. Gellert's eyes shone. "Then perhaps we could make it so." It was a simple sentence, yet in it lay the promise of something vast and dangerous. That night, Albus returned home with his heart racing. He lay awake long after the house had gone still, listening to the hum of the summer air. For the first time in months, he did not feel trapped. He felt alive. He dreamed of a world remade, where wizards lived freely, where fear no longer hid them in shadows. He saw himself standing beside Gellert, their wands raised, the old order swept aside. And beneath that vision, unspoken but unmistakable, was something deeper, the thrill of connection, of recognition, of love, though he did not yet dare call it that. In the morning, he found a note slipped beneath his door. "There is more to discuss," it read, in elegant, slanted script. "Meet me by the orchard at noon. G." And so began the summer that would change everything. It was the summer when Albus Dumbledore fell in love. The orchard lay beyond the stone wall at the edge of the village, half wild and filled with sunlight. The branches of the old apple trees stretched outward like arms, their leaves whispering softly in the morning breeze. It was there that Albus found Gellert Grindelwald, standing with his back to him, his wand raised, a shimmer of golden light twisting in the air before him. For a moment, Albus simply watched. The spellwork was intricate, beautiful, an illusion of a phoenix, its wings outstretched in slow, burning flight. When Gellert turned, the illusion dissolved into 1,000 motes of light. "You came," he said, a grin curving across his lips. "I wasn't certain you would." Albus stepped closer, his curiosity overcoming his hesitation. "You didn't leave much room for refusal." "Ah," Gellert said with mock solemnity, "but isn't that what magic is in the end? The art of leaving no room for refusal." He tucked his wand into his coat and looked at Albus in that disarming way of his, half amusement, half challenge. "I've been reading about your work. Transfiguration, yes? Exceptional. But tell me, Albus Dumbledore, why limit yourself to transformation of form when you could reshape the world itself?" The question struck something deep inside him. For years, Albus had hidden behind study, intellect, theory. Yet here was someone who saw through it all. Gellert spoke not as a student or rival, but as an equal, one who shared the same hunger, the same ache for meaning. They began meeting every day after that, sometimes in the orchard, sometimes in Batilda's cluttered library, where parchment covered every surface. They spoke of magic that could bind nations, of laws that could be rewritten, of the ancient relics whispered about in half-forgotten texts. It was Gellert who first mentioned them aloud, the Deathly Hallows. "3 brothers," he said one evening, his voice low and full of wonder. 3 gifts from Death himself, the Elder Wand, the Resurrection Stone, and the Cloak of Invisibility. Together, They would make the master of death. Albus felt the air shift around them. A legend, he said, though the word felt hollow. Every legend begins as truth, Gellert replied. You of all people should know that. His eyes were alight, his hands moving as he spoke, tracing invisible lines in the air. Think of it, Albus. If we possessed the Hallows, we could end suffering. We could free our kind from fear and secrecy. Wizards would no longer bow to ignorance. Free them, Albus echoed softly. For the greater good, Gellert said. And the phrase lingered like a spell neither of them could undo. Days turned into weeks, and their friendship grew into something neither could quite name. Albus found himself watching the light in Gellert's hair as he read, listening to the cadence of his voice as though it were music. He told himself it was admiration, intellectual kinship, but deep down he knew better. There was a fire between them that no spell could conjure or contain. It flared in their laughter, in the long silences that followed when words failed, in the way their hands brushed when they leaned over the same book. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in soft violet hues, they stood side by side beneath the apple trees. Fireflies glimmered around them, and somewhere in the distance, Ariana's laughter carried faintly through the air, a rare, delicate sound. You could come away with me, Gellert said suddenly. Leave this village. Leave this. He gestured toward the cottage. Smallness behind. We could travel the world, gather followers, begin the work that must be done. Albus hesitated. And Ariana. Gellert's expression softened, but only slightly. She is your sister, yes, but she is also your cage. You are wasting your brilliance tending to a flame that cannot be rekindled. Don't speak of her that way. Then see her clearly, Gellert said, his tone sharpening. You hide here because you're afraid to take the step that could change everything. The accusation stung. Albus turned away, but Gellert caught his wrist. His touch was light, yet it burned. Albus, he said quietly, almost tenderly now. You know I'm right. You feel it too. The world seemed to still around them. The wind hushed, the leaves hung motionless. Albus met his gaze and saw there the same longing, the same ache that pulsed in his own chest. Without thinking, he stepped closer. For a heartbeat, their faces were inches apart, the air alive between them. Then Gellert smiled, a quick, knowing smile, and stepped back. Not yet, he said softly. There's too much to do. That night, Albus couldn't sleep. He sat by his window, the stars reflecting in his eyes, Gellert's words echoing through his mind. For the greater good. The phrase had the ring of destiny, of purpose, and yet beneath it was something far more personal, a bond, a promise. In the days that followed, their plans grew bolder. They mapped routes across Europe, traced clues to the Hallows through old texts and coded letters. Gellert spoke of uniting wizardkind beneath one banner. Albus listened, torn between admiration and unease. Aberforth watched them with growing distrust. He's using you, he warned one night. That boy's got danger written all over him. Albus tried to protest, but he couldn't deny the truth. Gellert was dangerous. His brilliance cut like a blade. And yet, Albus could not pull away. The summer deepened. Magic filled the air between them. Light, laughter, and something perilous. The two of them stood on the edge of greatness, and though neither said it aloud, both knew that they were falling. Not into power, but into each other. The days that followed shimmered with golden light, each one feeling as though the world had paused to let them breathe in its promise. In the quiet village of Godric's Hollow, something extraordinary was unfolding. Two minds, two hearts, burning brighter with every word, every idea, every shared glance. From morning till dusk, Albus and Gellert could be found together. Sometimes they wandered through Batilda Bagshot's sprawling garden, parchment and quills in hand, scribbling furious notes about the lost hallows and the legends surrounding them. Other times, they shut themselves away in Batilda's study, surrounded by towering stacks of dusty volumes that smelled of parchment and old ink. The old witch would watch them fondly, shaking her head at the sound of their laughter. "Such clever boys," she would murmur, "such fire in their eyes." And fire it was, the kind that could warm or consume. Albus had never known such exhilaration. His mind had always been his pride, but now it was alive in a way it had never been before. Gellert challenged him, provoked him, filled his every thought. They spoke of freedom, of purpose, of a world remade by those who dared to dream beyond fear. But beneath every word there lay something unspoken, something neither dared name, though it pulsed between them like a living thing. One afternoon, while the sun burned low, they sat beneath the great oak tree behind Batilda's house. Scrolls were spread before them, but their attention had long since drifted. The air smelled of apples and dust, the hum of bees mingling with the rustle of leaves. "You've changed since I came," Gellert said suddenly. Albus looked up from his notes. "Changed? You smile more. You doubt less." Gellert leaned back against the trunk, his golden hair catching the sunlight. "When I first met you, I thought you'd buried yourself under all that brilliance of yours, but you've come alive." "I might say the same of you," Albus said quietly. Gellert's smile turned soft, but his eyes were sharp. "Alive is not enough. We were born to lead, Albus, to reshape the very order of things. Together, we could build a new world." Albus's heart stirred at the words, though unease flickered somewhere deep within him. "And what of those who oppose us?" "They will learn," Gellert said simply, "or they will fall behind. The world cannot be changed without sacrifice." Albus looked at him then, truly looked. There was light in Gellert's gaze, but it burned too fiercely, as though the line between love and ambition no longer existed. Still, he could not turn away. There was something magnetic about him, something that pulled Albus forward, despite the whisper of warning that stirred in his chest. That evening, as they walked home through the twilight, Gellert's hand brushed against his. The touch was fleeting, accidental perhaps, but it sent a current through Albus that lingered long after they parted. When he entered a house, Aberforth was waiting, arms crossed, jaw tight. "Where have you been?" "With Gellert," Albus said, keeping his tone even. "Always with him," Aberforth muttered. "You've forgotten Ariana again." "I have not," Albus snapped too quickly. "She was asleep when I left. She needs calm, not smothering." Aberforth's eyes flashed. "She needs her brother, not some dreamer who thinks he's above her." Albus turned away, anger rising hot and quick. "You don't understand what we're doing, what we're building." "Oh, I understand," Aberforth said darkly. "You think he's like you, but he's not, Albus. He's using you. He's clever, that one. Dangerous. You'll see." Albus said nothing. He climbed the stairs to his room, heart pounding, the argument echoing in his ears. But when he reached his desk, he found another note waiting, folded neatly, the handwriting unmistakable. Come to the orchard, midnight. He hesitated only a moment before throwing on his cloak and slipping outside. The night was still and full of silver light. The orchard glowed faintly under the moon, and there, standing among the shadows, was Gellert. "You came," Gellert said, a smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "You didn't give me much choice," Albus replied softly. "Nor would you have wanted one." Gellert stepped closer, his eyes glinting. "Tell me, Albus, do you ever wonder what it would feel like to hold real power, to stop pretending to be less than what we are?" "I've wondered," Albus admitted. "Then stop wondering." Gellert's voice dropped, low and urgent. "We could begin now. The hallows, the movement, everything. The world will remember our names." The words should have thrilled him. Instead, they brought a strange weight to Albus's chest. "You speak as though it will be easy." "Nothing worth doing ever is," Gellert said. "But with you beside me, it will be unstoppable." There it was, the truth behind all their talk, all their dreaming. "With you beside me." The words were quiet, but they struck something deep and fragile within him. Gellert reached out, his hand brushing Albus's cheek, his touch both daring and uncertain. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to stop. Then Gellert leaned in, his voice barely a whisper. "I've waited my whole life to find someone who saw the world as I do." Albus didn't move, didn't breathe. The night hummed with magic, and for that single moment, the future shimmered before them. Beautiful and terrible, full of everything they might become. Then, from the distance, a sound shattered the stillness. A faint cry. Ariana's voice, high and frightened, echoing from the cottage. Albus drew back, the spell between them breaking. "I have to go." Gellert's face hardened, the tenderness fading. "Always running back to them," he said, bitterness creeping into his tone. "You can't save her, Albus. You can't save any of them." But Albus was already gone, his cloak whipping behind him as he ran. When he reached the house, he found Ariana trembling, Aberforth trying to calm her. The sight pierced him to the core. As he knelt beside her, she reached for his hand, her blue eyes wide with confusion. "It's all right," he whispered. "You're safe." But deep down, he knew the truth. He was standing between two worlds, and soon one of them would break. Outside, beneath the moonlight, Gellert watched from the shadows, his eyes cold and unreadable. Then he turned and vanished into the night, the air shimmering faintly where he had stood. The orchard fell silent once more, but its stillness was deceptive. The storm was coming, and when it came, it would tear everything apart. The storm broke 3 days later, not of rain or thunder, but of words and hearts torn open. Ever since that night in the orchard, Albus Dumbledore had been a man divided. He carried on as though all was well, his smile calm, his voice measured, yet inside him, 2 worlds warred. On one side stood his family, his duty to Ariana, his promise to keep her safe. On the other stood Gellert Grindelwald, bright as the dawn, burning with purpose, whispering of freedom and destiny. The house had grown tense. Aberforth moved through it like a shadow, his eyes wary, his silence sharp. Ariana, sensitive to every shift of emotion, seemed more fragile than ever. And Albus. Albus could not bring himself to choose. Each morning he still met Gellert in Batilda's library or in the orchard, telling himself that it was only for study, for planning. But the truth was far deeper. The truth was that he could not stay away. Gellert's presence drew him like a spell. His words, his laughter, even his silence had a gravity that bent the air around them. When they spoke of the Hallows, of uniting wizard-kind beneath a new banner, it was as if they were shaping the future with their very breath. Gellert would pace the floor, his cloak sweeping behind him, his eyes alive with light. "Think of it, Albus," he would say, his voice glowing with conviction. "An end to fear. No more hiding, no more secrecy. Magic could take its rightful place in the world." "And what of those who would resist?" Albus asked once, his voice quiet. "They will understand in time," Gellert answered easily. "Or be made to." Albus hesitated, his conscience stirring uneasily. "That sounds like conquest." Gellert smiled. "Call it what you will. The strong must lead, or the weak will drag the world into ruin. Tell me, would you rather let ignorance rule forever?" Albus could find no answer, because when Gellert spoke, the world seemed so clear, so simple. And in the glow of that clarity, even his doubts seemed small. But at night, when he returned home and found Ariana asleep by the window, her wand clutched in trembling fingers, the simplicity shattered. Her face looked peaceful in sleep, but Albus knew too well how fragile that peace was. One wrong word, one flash of fear, and her magic could surge out uncontrollably, destructive and blind. He would stand beside her then, brushing a lock of hair from her brow, whispering words of comfort she would never hear. And always a thought haunted him. What if Gellert is right? What if there is a world where she would not have to hide? It was that thought, born of love, twisted by hope, that bound him tighter to Gellert than any vow could. One evening they stood at the top of the hill overlooking the village. The sunset spilled crimson light across the fields, painting their faces in golden shadow. Gellert turned to him suddenly. "We could begin now," he said. "You and I. We have knowledge, skill, purpose. Others will follow." Albus's heart gave a painful throb. "And Ariana?" Gellert's gaze softened, though his words were firm. "She will be cared for. Aberforth can remain with her. You cannot spend your life tending to the past, Albus. You were born for something greater." A breeze passed between them, carrying the scent of rain and apple blossoms. Albus wanted to believe him. He wanted to believe that the brilliance in Gellert's eyes could burn away every shadow. But he heard Aberforth's voice in his mind. "He's using you." He pushed the thought aside. "If we do this," he said slowly, "it must be for good, not for glory, not for power." Gellert laughed softly, stepping closer. "Of course, the greater good." The phrase settled between them like a vow. For a moment they simply stood there, two young men, the world spread before them, their futures woven together by belief and by something more dangerous still. Gellert reached out, his hand brushing Albus's sleeve, his voice barely above a whisper. "You feel it too, don't you? That we were meant for this?" Albus met his gaze, and in it he saw everything. Passion, brilliance, madness, love. He could not speak. Instead, he reached out, his fingers closing around Gellert's hand. The air around them seemed to hum, as though the world itself recognized the power of that connection. Then, "Albus!" The voice broke the spell. They turned to see Aberforth striding up the hill, his face flushed with anger. "Enough of this!" he shouted. "You've spent every waking hour with him while Ariana waits alone." "Aberforth!" "No!" His voice cracked, rough with grief. "You talk about saving the world, but you can't even save your own sister." Gellert's expression hardened, cold and sharp. "Your brother's mind is wasted here," he said coolly. "You should be grateful he's destined for more than a life of tending the broken." Aberforth's wand was in his hand before Albus could move. "Say that again," he hissed. Gellert's smile was dangerous. "Broken," he repeated, the word deliberate, cruel. "Enough!" Albus cried, stepping between them. But it was too late. Aberforth's spell shot forward like lightning. Gellert deflected it with a sweep of his wand, sparks flying into the air. Albus raised his wand instinctively, shouting for them to stop, but the orchard exploded in light. Ariana's scream pierced the air. In the chaos, she had come running, drawn by the surge of magic, her eyes wide with terror. Spells collided, sparks flying wild. A burst of blue light, a flash of red. Then silence. When the smoke cleared, Ariana lay still upon the grass. For a long moment, none of them moved. The light of the setting sun fell across her face, peaceful and pale. Albus fell to his knees beside her, his breath breaking. "No, Ariana." He touched her cheek, but it was already cold. Aberforth stood frozen, his wand trembling in his hand. Then he turned on Gellert, his face twisted with fury. "You—" But Gellert had already stepped back, his expression unreadable. "It was an accident," he said, his voice distant. "A tragic waste." "Waste!" Aberforth lunged toward him, but Albus caught his arm. Gellert's eyes met Albus's, and for the briefest instant there was something there, something raw, like regret. But it vanished as quickly as it came. "I must go," he said quietly. "They'll blame me for this." He turned, his cloak swirling, and vanished with a crack. Aberforth wrenched himself free of Albus's grasp, his voice breaking. "You let him in. You brought him here." "I didn't." "You did!" Aberforth's tears shone in the fading light. "And now she's dead." He stumbled away, leaving Albus alone beside Ariana's body. The night deepened around him, silent and endless. Albus sat there until dawn, his wand dim in his hand, the weight of loss pressing on his chest like a curse that would never lift. He had dreamed of changing the world, and in one terrible instant he had destroyed his own. The morning after Ariana's death dawned grey and hollow, as if the sun itself hesitated to rise upon what had been done. A thin mist coiled through the fields, and the village seemed to hold its breath. Inside the Dumbledore home, the air was heavy with silence, broken only by the creak of the old floorboards beneath Albus's pacing feet. He had not slept. He could not. The night had stretched endlessly before him, hours of numb disbelief followed by waves of grief that threatened to tear him apart. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the flash of light, heard the crack of clashing spells, saw Ariana's small body fall to the ground. His hands trembled when he tried to write to the ministry, to anyone who might offer some official explanation, but in truth, there was none. 3 wands had been raised that night, 3 spells had collided, and none of them would ever know whose curse had struck the fatal blow. Aberforth sat in the corner, his face white with fury and exhaustion. He hadn't spoken since dawn, save for a single sentence that cut deeper than any blade. "You killed her," he had said. And though Albus wanted to deny it, wanted to cry out that it wasn't true, that it could have been anyone, the words had settled in his heart like truth. Because whether his wand had cast the curse or not, the fault was his. It was his pride, his blindness, his love of Gellert's brilliance that had drawn the storm down upon them. Outside, villagers began to gather when word spread of the tragedy. Bathilda Bagshot came, weeping quietly, wringing her hands. "Such a sweet girl," she whispered. "Such a terrible, terrible loss." But when she tried to offer comfort, Aberforth turned on her, his grief raw. "Where is he?" he shouted. "Where's your precious nephew?" Bathilda flinched. "Gone," she said. "Vanished in the night." "Coward!" Aberforth spat. Albus stood by the window, silent. His eyes traced the horizon, where the mist had begun to thin. Somewhere out there, Gellert was running, leaving behind the wreckage they had made together. He did not return to Ariana's side until the house emptied again. The small sitting room had been turned into a place of mourning. Candles flickered around her, their light trembling. She looked so young, so impossibly fragile, her hands folded neatly across her chest. Albus knelt beside her, unable to find words. The scent of smoke and candle wax filled his senses. In that moment, the weight of every dream, every plan, every illusion he had built with Gellert crushed him utterly. He had thought himself wise. He had thought love could be made pure by intellect, by reason. He had been wrong. When the funeral came, the sky wept with rain. The small graveyard behind their home filled with muddy water, and Albus barely heard the priest's voice. Aberforth stood apart, his shoulders stiff, his eyes blazing with a hatred so fierce it seemed to freeze the air around him. When the last handful of earth was cast over Ariana's coffin, Aberforth stepped forward, his voice shaking. "I'll never forgive you," he said quietly. "You let him in, and you let her die." Albus bowed his head. He did not try to defend himself. He knew there was nothing he could say that would make it right. That night, after everyone had gone, he sat alone in the kitchen. The house was dark and silent, the fire long gone cold. On the table before him lay Ariana's wand, slender, simple, her name carved faintly into the handle. He ran his fingers over it, his mind empty. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly in the distance. For a moment, he thought he saw a shadow move beyond the window, a flicker of light, a presence half familiar. He rose, his wand in hand, and stepped out into the night. The rain had slowed to a drizzle. The village lay still. And there, at the edge of the orchard where it had all begun, stood a figure cloaked in black. "Gellert," Albus breathed. The figure turned. Even soaked by rain, he looked radiant, his golden hair plastered to his face, his wand drawn but lowered. His eyes met Albus's, bright with something that might have been remorse or defiance. "I had to see you," Gellert said. "Before I go." "Go?" Albus's voice was hoarse. "You already fled once." "I fled because they would have caged me," Gellert said. "Because they would have blamed me for everything. You know what they would have done." "Perhaps they would have been right." Gellert flinched. "You don't mean that." Albus stepped closer, his voice trembling. "Ariana is dead. My sister is gone, and you stand here speaking of blame." Gellert's eyes hardened. "Do you think I wanted this? Do you think I meant for her to die?" His hand shook slightly, his knuckles white around his wand. "I loved you, Albus. You must know that. But love cannot bind destiny." Albus stared at him, the words cutting deep. "If this is love," he said bitterly, "then I would rather be rid of it." For a long moment, neither spoke. The rain hissed in the grass, and the night wind whispered through the trees. At last, Gellert lowered his gaze. "I will leave Britain," he said quietly. "There is nothing left for me here. But the dream we shared, it still lives. One day you'll understand that. One day you'll see it was never about us. It was about the world." He turned to go, but Albus's voice stopped him. "And what will the world cost you next, Gellert?" Gellert looked back, and for the first time Albus saw fear in his eyes, not of capture or failure, but of himself. "Everything," Gellert whispered. Then he was gone, disappearing into the darkness with a crack of displaced air. Albus stood there long after, the rain washing down his face. When he finally returned indoors, dawn had begun to break. Light crept through the windows, cold and grey. He sank into a chair, exhaustion pressing down like a curse. It was then that he made his vow, unspoken, but fierce as magic itself. He would never again allow ambition or desire to blind him. He would never again trust love to guide him. He would spend his life atoning, not through words, but through deeds. Years later, when he stood before the mirror of Erised as an old man, he would see himself as he was that morning, a boy in a rain-soaked cloak, kneeling beside his sister's grave, with Gellert's shadow fading into the mist beyond. And though he would rise to become the greatest wizard of his age, the memory of that summer would never leave him. For in losing Gellert and Ariana, he had learned the cruelest truth of all. That even love, when mixed with power, could destroy more than it could ever save. The years that followed were a blur of shadows and light, as though time itself sought to heal and wound in equal measure. For Albus Dumbledore, the world had not stopped moving, though for a long while he wished it had. He buried himself in study, in solitude, and in the endless pursuit of knowledge that might dull the ache of loss. Aberforth barely spoke to him after the funeral. He had taken Ariana's small chipped teacup and placed it on the mantel beside her wand. "She deserved better," he said once, his voice flat. And that was the last thing he said to his brother for nearly a year. Albus did not argue. He spent his days in the upper rooms of their house, reading until the candles guttered out, writing letters he never sent. The few who dared to visit spoke softly, uncertainly, as if afraid their words might crack the fragile quiet that hung around him. Even Batilda, dear old Batilda, could not reach him. He had thought often of Gellert Grindelwald, too often. The name haunted him like an unfinished spell, powerful, dangerous, impossible to forget. He tried to convince himself that he hated Gellert now, that love had burned itself to ash. Yet in the lonely hours of night, when wind crept through the cracks of the old cottage, his thoughts returned to that summer, to the orchard, to the laughter that once filled those fields like music. He saw Gellert's face in dreams, smiling, alive, bright with conviction. And every time, Albus woke with tears on his face. It was in that darkness that a letter came. Delivered by owl one frost-bitten morning, it bore no seal. The handwriting, however, he knew instantly. He held it for a long while before breaking the wax. "Albus, I do not ask forgiveness, only understanding. You once told me that power and love could coexist, that one might temper the other. Perhaps you were right, but I no longer believe the world deserves that balance. I am leaving England. There is work to be done, and I will not rest until I see it begun. I hope, When history remembers us, it will remember what we tried to build. G. The parchment trembled in his hands. There was no anger in him, not even hatred, only an old, quiet ache, like a wound that had forgotten how to close. He placed the letter in a small wooden box and sealed it shut. In the years that followed, Albus rose through the ranks of the magical world. His brilliance returned, sharper and colder than before. He took up teaching at Hogwarts, where his mind found refuge in the endless wonder of his students' curiosity. To them, he was kind, wise, eccentric, the man with twinkling eyes and strange socks who never quite stopped smiling. They did not see the sorrow behind that smile. Few ever would. But the world was changing. Whispers began to spread. Rumors of a wizard gathering power across Europe, uniting followers beneath a banner marked with a strange angular symbol, a triangle enclosing a circle bisected by a straight line. Albus recognized it instantly, the sign of the Hallows, their old dream. And the man who carried it as his emblem was Gellert Grindelwald. Each report brought a new chill. Villages burned, families fled, governments trembled. Grindelwald's followers called themselves the acolytes of the greater good, their leader a visionary who promised freedom for wizardkind through dominion over muggles. Albus could not look away. Every word, every speech, every act of Gellert spread like fire through the wizarding world. And at the center of it all stood the boy he had once loved, the boy he had thought he could change. He spent nights poring over maps and reports, reading the accounts of those who had escaped Gellert's reach. His students noticed the shadows deepening beneath his eyes, the silences that lasted too long between his words. When the ministry sent envoys to ask for counsel, he gave advice but refused involvement. "I cannot," he told them, his voice soft but firm. "It must not be me." For though he never said it aloud, Albus feared what might happen if they met again. He feared what he might see in Gellert's eyes, and worse, what Gellert might see in his. Still, he kept the letter, and on nights when the wind howled through the castle towers, he took it from the box, traced the ink with trembling fingers, and wondered if destiny could be rewritten. The years turned. Wars rose and fell. The name Grindelwald became both terror and legend. His fortress in Nurmengard cast its shadow across Europe, and the world whispered his title, the Dark Lord of the West. It was then, after so many years of silence, that another letter came. This one bore the official seal of the International Confederation of Wizards. Professor Dumbledore, it read, "Your counsel is urgently requested. Grindelwald's forces have taken control of most of Central Europe. No wizard alive can match his power, save one. It must be you." Albus's hands shook as he set the parchment down. The ink blurred before his eyes. It was inevitable, the moment he had feared since that summer day in Godric's Hollow. For years, he had avoided confrontation, had told himself that his guilt, his love, his fear disqualified him. But now there was no one else left to stand against Gellert. He rose from his chair and walked to the window. Beyond the castle walls, the grounds stretched beneath a rising moon. The lake shimmered like silver glass, and somewhere in the forbidden forest, an owl called into the night. He thought of Ariana, of her laughter, her gentle hands. He thought of Aberforth, whose bitterness had hardened into silence. And he thought of Gellert, How young they had been, how foolishly certain that love and power could walk hand in hand. When he finally spoke, his voice was no more than a whisper. "It ends with me." The next morning, he sent his reply to the Confederation. He would go. Word of his decision spread swiftly through the wizarding world. Some called it destiny, others tragedy. But those who truly knew him, those few who had seen the depth of his sorrow, understood what it was: penance. As he prepared for the journey, he opened the wooden box one last time. Inside lay Gellert's letter, yellowed with age. Beneath it, wrapped in a strip of worn silk, was Ariana's wand. He placed both in his pocket, not as weapons, but as reminders. That night, before he departed, he stood alone at Ariana's grave. Snow fell softly, dusting the earth in white. "I am sorry," he whispered, "for everything, for what I did and what I did not do." The wind stirred, carrying his words away into the stillness. Then he turned toward the east, where Gellert waited in his fortress of black stone, and began to walk. The War of Hearts was long past, but the reckoning of it, the final test of love and power, was yet to come. The journey eastward was long and silent. Each mile that Albus Dumbledore crossed felt like a step backward through time, back through the ghosts of his youth, back through summers long dead. Snow fell thick over the valleys of Europe, blanketing the scars of war, but nothing could hide the evidence of Gellert Grindelwald's reign. Villages once full of light now lay in uneasy quiet. Muggle families had vanished without trace, and wizards whispered in fear of the symbol that marked walls and banners alike, the deathly hallows carved in fire. He travelled alone, shunning company, keeping to quiet paths. He spoke little, slept less. Every night he dreamed of two boys beneath the apple trees, arguing about the future, their voices full of laughter and impossible certainty. And every morning he woke with the same hollow ache in his chest. News of Gellert's fortress reached him days before he saw it. They called it Nurmengard, a stronghold of black granite built high among the Carpathian peaks. It rose from the mountains like a wound against the sky, its towers wreathed in perpetual storm. The locals whispered that even the clouds feared to pass too near. Albus arrived at its gates on a morning heavy with mist. The air hummed faintly with enchantments, wards of terrible complexity woven into the very stones. He could feel Gellert's magic in them, sharp and elegant as a blade. He stood there for a long while, his cloak stirring in the wind. His wand rested in his hand, though he did not yet raise it. Instead, he looked up at the highest tower, where a light flickered faintly through the haze. Somewhere beyond those walls, the man he had once loved was waiting for him. "Gellert," he whispered, "it's time." The guards at the gate moved before he could finish the thought. Two wizards in black armor, wands drawn. But Albus merely raised his hand, and the world seemed to shift. The air rippled, the ground trembled, and a wave of invisible force swept outward. The guards fell back as though struck by wind, their wands spinning harmlessly from their grasp. The gate creaked open. He walked through the corridors of Nurmengard like a ghost. Spells clung to the air, ancient and cruel, but they parted before him as mist before the sun. The deeper he went, the quieter it became. At last, he reached the great hall, a vast chamber of dark stone, lit by torches that burned with pale blue fire. And there, waiting upon the dais, was Gellert Grindelwald. He had aged, but not broken. His hair, still gold though streaked with silver, fell loose over his shoulders. His robes were simple, his wand at his side, yet his presence filled the room. His eyes, those same bright, unearthly eyes, met Albus's, and for a heartbeat it was as though no time had passed at all. "So," Gellert said softly, "you've come at last." Albus's throat tightened. "You knew I would." Gellert smiled faintly. "I hoped you would." The silence that followed was vast. For years, both had prepared for this moment, yet neither seemed to know how to begin. "I see you've built your dream," Albus said finally, his gaze sweeping the hall. "A kingdom of fear." "I built what we spoke of," Gellert replied. "A world where wizards need not hide, where power is no longer a sin." "At what cost?" "Change always demands cost." Gellert's voice was calm, almost gentle. "You knew that once. You believed it." "I believed in us," Albus said quietly. "In what we could be, not in this." Gellert descended the dais, his steps light. "And what are we now, Albus? Enemies?" "Fate seems to think so." Gellert stopped before him. For a moment, the two men stood only a few feet apart. The light caught the lines of their faces, the marks of years and choices carved deep. "I never hated you," Gellert said, "not even after that night." Albus's hand trembled slightly around his wand. "You killed too many for me to call that love." Gellert's eyes glinted. "And you killed one to prove you could live without it." The words struck like a curse. Ariana's face flashed before Albus's eyes, and the old guilt rose like fire in his throat. He steadied himself, his voice low. "You still believe this is love? This madness? This blood you've spilled?" "I believe it began as love," Gellert said, his voice breaking into something softer, almost mournful. "And perhaps it still is. The world you and I dreamed of was built on love, Albus. You're the one who turned away." "No," Albus said, his voice cold now. "I grew up." For a long while, neither spoke. The air between them shimmered with tension, the weight of all that had passed, all that remained unsaid. Then, with a single breath, the duel began. Light erupted, fierce and blinding. Gellert's wand cut arcs of fire through the air, golden and lethal. Albus countered with waves of shimmering blue, their magic colliding in thunderous bursts that shook the hall. Spells of unimaginable power tore through stone and shadow alike. But even in battle, their movements mirrored one another, fluid, graceful, as if two halves of the same soul warred against itself. Albus struck with precision, Gellert with brilliance. Power met power, and neither yielded. "You could have ruled beside me," Gellert cried, his voice echoing. "We could have changed everything, and doomed everything in the process." Albus's reply was a roar, grief and fury entwined. A jet of light struck the wall beside him, showering the floor with shards of stone. Albus retaliated, his wand sweeping in a wide arc, sending a ribbon of silver light that coiled like a serpent around Gellert's arm, disarming him. Gellert stumbled, breathless, his wand clattering across the floor. But instead of fear, he laughed, a short, broken sound. "So it ends," he said, his chest heaving. "And still, I love you." Albus lowered his wand. The words hung in the air, fragile as glass. He stepped forward slowly, every movement heavy with sorrow. "And I pity you," he whispered, "more than you'll ever know." He raised his wand again, this time not to kill but to bind. Chains of light sprang forth, wrapping around Gellert's wrists and fading into the air. The battle was over. Gellert sank to his knees, his head bowed. "They'll lock me away," he murmured. but they'll never understand. They'll call you a hero, and still, you'll dream of me." Albus said nothing. When the Aurors arrived, they found Grindelwald kneeling in silence, unresisting. Dumbledore stood before him, pale and still as stone. As they led Gellert away, their eyes met one last time. In that brief, wordless moment, all that had been between them, love, fury, grief, admiration, passed like lightning. Then he was gone, swallowed by shadow. Albus remained in the empty hall long after the torches died. His hands trembled as he sank to the floor. The cold wind of the mountains howled through the broken doors, carrying the faint echo of Gellert's voice. "For the greater good." He closed his eyes, and for the first time in many years, he wept. Not for victory, but for everything love had destroyed. The aftermath of the duel rippled through the wizarding world like a tremor. The fortress of Nurmengard stood silent now, its once blazing banners torn down, its corridors empty but for echoes. The reign of Gellert Grindelwald was over. The terror that had swept across Europe began to fade, leaving behind ruins, mourning, and the slow return of dawn. But for Albus Dumbledore, there was no triumph, only the heavy quiet of survival. He returned to England as the world's saviour, though he did not feel saved. Songs were written in his name, tales told in every tavern and classroom. Wizards spoke of the duel as if it had been destiny itself, the ultimate triumph of light over darkness. Yet when Albus heard those words, he turned away. Because in his heart, he knew it had not been light that defeated darkness. It had been love, broken and twisted until it could fight no longer. He resumed his post at Hogwarts as though nothing had changed. But the castle, which had once felt like home, now seemed vast and hollow. Students whispered of the great battle, eager to glimpse the legendary man who had defeated Grindelwald. They expected grandeur. What they found instead was a quiet, tired professor who smiled too softly and spoke as though every word carried memory. Years passed. Seasons turned. The world healed itself in fragments. Gellert remained imprisoned in the highest cell of his own fortress, the one he had built for his enemies. Few ever saw him, and none returned unchanged. Rumour said he sat in silence, refusing to escape even when he could. Albus never visited. He told himself it was mercy to stay away, but deep down he feared that seeing Gellert again would unravel all he had rebuilt. And yet, in the privacy of his study, he often found his thoughts drawn eastward, to a lonely tower where winter never ended. Sometimes, in the still hours of the night, he imagined what Gellert might look like now. Older, thinner, his golden hair turned silver by time. Did he still dream of the world they had wanted to build? Did he hate Albus for ending it? Or worse, did he still love him? The questions had no answers, and so Albus buried them beneath work. He became headmaster. He mentored brilliant students, taught with patience and humour, and offered guidance to all who sought it. He was loved and respected by many, but none ever knew the sorrow that hid behind those blue eyes. It was during those quiet years that a name began to echo through the halls of magic once more. A name spoken in fear and prophecy. Tom Riddle, a boy of extraordinary talent, brilliant and ambitious, with a hunger for knowledge that reminded Albus all too painfully of another. When Riddle first arrived at Hogwarts, 11 years old and wary of affection, Albus sensed something dark in him, a mirror of a past he could never forget. He watched the boy carefully, guiding where he could, warning where he must. But darkness, once born, seldom listens. And as the years unfolded, the world began to see that Gellert Grindelwald's fall had not ended the cycle. It had merely paused it. Another shadow was rising, this one colder, more patient, and perhaps even more dangerous. When the news of Riddle's transformation into Lord Voldemort reached Albus, he felt that old weight return to his chest. The faces changed, the wars changed, but the song was the same. The quest for power, the delusion of control, the belief that love was weakness. He saw it all coming again. And in quiet moments, he would stand before the mirror of Erised, the mirror that reflected one's heart's deepest desire. For most, it showed riches or glory. For Albus, it never changed. He saw himself standing beside a young man with golden hair, and beside them, a girl laughing softly, a girl who had never died. He had learned long ago to turn away from that reflection, but even as he did, it haunted him still. One autumn night, many years later, Albus sat in his office, the fire burning low. The hour was late, the corridors silent. On his desk lay an old wooden box, the same one he had carried from Godric's Hollow, its surface worn smooth with age. He opened it. Inside lay two things, Ariana's wand and Gellert's letter. The parchment had yellowed, the ink fading to brown, yet the words still burned. When history remembers us. He traced the line with his fingertip, feeling the sting of memory. History had remembered them, yes, but not as lovers, nor as dreamers. They had become myth. One hailed as savior, the other condemned as villain. But the truth between them was far more fragile, far more human. He folded the letter and slipped it into his robes. Then, rising from his chair, he crossed to the window. The night sky stretched wide and deep beyond the towers, stars glimmering like distant memories. Somewhere out there, Gellert was still alive. And though their lives had diverged beyond repair, a part of Albus knew that their bond had never truly been severed. In the following years, the new war consumed everything. Voldemort's rise brought darkness back to Britain, and Albus found himself once more standing against it. He gathered allies, founded the Order of the Phoenix, and became the symbol of hope to countless wizards. Yet he felt, in the quietest corners of his heart, that he was fighting not just for the world, but to atone for the one he had failed to save long ago. As the first battle of that new war raged, Albus's hand trembled upon his wand. Age had not dulled his magic, but it had deepened his understanding of it. He knew now that power meant nothing without mercy, that love was the strongest spell of all and the most painful. He often spoke those truths to his students, his voice warm with conviction. But when they asked where he had learned them, he only smiled and said, "From experience." It was many years later, decades in truth, when a letter came from the East. It bore no seal. Its parchment was coarse, the handwriting unsteady but unmistakable. Albus. They tell me the world has changed again. Perhaps it has. I hear you have another dark lord to fight. How strange that the circle never ends. But I wish you luck. Do not think I mock you when I say that I am proud. You kept your faith, even when I lost mine. Gellert Albus read the letter beneath the candlelight, his hands trembling. Then he smiled, a small, sad smile, touched with warmth. For the first time in many years, he whispered aloud, "And I never stopped loving you." He sealed the letter within the wooden box beside Ariana's wand, closed the lid, and left it there, an unfinished story, preserved in silence. The snow fell again that winter, gentle as breath upon the world. And somewhere in a tower far away, a prisoner looked out through a narrow window, his breath misting the glass, and smiled at the same falling snow. Winter clung stubbornly to the Scottish Highlands, its breath whispering against the towers of Hogwarts. The castle seemed older than ever in those days, its stones heavy with history, its corridors full of unspoken things. Snow drifted past Albus Dumbledore's office window, settling softly upon the ledge. Inside, the fire burned low, casting long shadows across shelves of books and silver instruments that ticked and whirred like restless ghosts. Albus sat behind his desk, a cup of untouched tea cooling beside him. A letter lay open in his hand, the letter from Gellert Grindelwald, written from his cell in Nurmengard. He had read it many times now, each word carved into his heart like the etching of a spell that could never be undone. "Do not think I mock you when I say that I am proud," the letter had said. Pride. It was such a strange word, so small for the depth of what it carried. Albus had turned it over in his mind again and again, uncertain whether it was forgiveness or farewell. Perhaps both. Perhaps neither. The snow fell harder. Outside, the students were preparing for the winter holidays, their laughter faintly echoing through the courtyard. Life went on. Always it went on. Yet beneath that laughter, beneath the world's hum of ordinary joys, there lingered the shadow of everything Albus had lost. He rose and crossed the room, standing before the window. From this height, the forbidden forest stretched dark and endless, a sea of black beneath the pale sky. He thought of the boy who had once walked beside him through a summer orchard, whose laughter had filled the air with promise. He thought of how easily love could become destiny's snare. It had been many years since the duel at Nurmengard. Gellert had become a ghost to the world, forgotten by most, remembered by few. Yet for Albus, he remained as vivid as ever, his face, his voice, his conviction. There were nights when the past returned in dreams so real that Albus would wake expecting to hear his name spoken in that familiar, teasing tone. He had learned to live with it, as one learns to live with an old wound that aches in cold weather. But that winter, the ache deepened. The war with Voldemort was growing darker. Reports of disappearances, murders, and atrocities arrived daily. And though Albus led with calm wisdom, those close to him saw how heavily the burden weighed upon him. He had faced darkness before and triumphed, but never without cost. One evening, as the last embers of daylight faded, Minerva McGonagall entered his office. "They've confirmed it," she said grimly. "He's returned to full strength. The Ministry is in denial, but it's only a matter of time." Albus nodded, his expression unreadable. Then the circle closes once more. Minerva frowned. "You speak as if it were inevitable." "Perhaps it is," he murmured. "The world always repeats its lessons until we learn them properly. Power calls to power, and love is left to pick up the pieces." She looked at him with quiet concern. "You're not alone this time, Albus." He smiled faintly. "No, but the ghosts still walk beside me." When she left, he turned back to the fire. The flames shimmered in shades of blue and gold, reminding him cruelly of Gellert's eyes. He closed his own, feeling the memory of that final duel burn through him once more. The surge of magic, the taste of lightning in the air, the silence that followed when it was done. And then, that last look between them. It haunted him more than any curse could. He poured himself a glass of brandy and sat again, the quiet stretching around him. On the desk lay a half-finished letter addressed to no one, its parchment creased and blotched with ink. He picked up his quill and began to write, though he knew the letter would never be sent. My dear Gellert, you once told me that power was the only truth the world respected. I disagreed then, and I disagree still. But I have come to understand something I did not then, that love, too, is a kind of power. It is the one force that endures when all others fail. And yet, it is also the one I have never mastered. He paused, staring at the words. The clock on the mantel ticked softly, marking the slow passage of time. I forgive you, he wrote finally, and I forgive myself, though I suspect neither of us will ever truly deserve it. He folded the letter, sealed it with wax, and placed it inside the wooden box with Ariana's wand and Gellert's first message. Then he closed the lid, pressing his hand against it as though sealing away part of his own soul. The next morning, he received news from the east. Grindelwald had refused to yield a secret to Voldemort himself. He had laughed in the Dark Lord's face, they said, and when Voldemort left Nurmengard in fury, Gellert was found dead in his cell. The messenger spoke the words softly, uncertain how the great Dumbledore might respond. Albus only bowed his head. Thank you, he said, and dismissed him. When he was alone, he stood at the window once more. Outside, the snow had stopped. The world was still, wrapped in white silence. He pressed his palm against the cold glass and closed his eyes. Goodbye, Gellert, he whispered. No tears came. There was only a deep, aching stillness, the quiet that comes not from peace, but from the end of struggle. He thought of that last letter, of the way Gellert had written, I am proud. And he thought of the boy in the orchard, his hair bright as sunlight, his voice carrying dreams into the summer air. The world would remember Grindelwald as a tyrant, a dark wizard defeated. But Albus remembered something else, the laughter of a friend, the brilliance of a mind that had once matched his own, the love that had shaped them both and destroyed them. That night, the fire in his office burned long after he slept. In his dreams, the orchard bloomed again. He stood beneath the apple tree, the air warm and golden. A young man turned toward him, smiling, his eyes alive with light. No words passed between them. There was only understanding, pure, silent, and final. When Albus awoke, the first light of dawn touched the horizon. He rose, straightened his robes, and went to greet another day. The world still needed him, and so he would go on. But deep within, beneath layers of wisdom and memory, a single truth remained, as steady as a heartbeat. Love endures, even when it cannot save. Spring crept slowly over Scotland that year, reluctant and pale after a winter of endless frost. Buds pressed their green fingers through the thawing earth, and the lake below Hogwarts shimmered like glass beneath the returning sun. Yet within the castle walls, the season felt heavy, subdued, as though the air itself carried secrets. The world beyond was once again at war. Voldemort's power had grown monstrous, spreading like shadow through every corner of Britain. Each day brought darker tidings. Families gone missing, ministry officials assassinated, strange marks burned into the sky. And still, the wizarding world looked to Albus Dumbledore for strength. He gave it as he always had, calmly, wisely, with a smile that convinced others that hope remained. But behind that calm, his heart felt older than his years, burdened not only by the war, but by ghosts that had never left him. Late at night, when the castle slept and the portraits drowsed in silence, Albus would walk the dark corridors alone. His steps echoed softly, his robes whispering against the flagstones. Sometimes he would pause by the tall windows overlooking the grounds, gazing out at the moonlit forest beyond. The air smelled of rain and earth, clean, new, alive, and yet he could not shake the feeling that he stood on the edge of something final. He had dreamed of Gellert again, not as he was at the end, aged and broken in his stone cell, but as the boy he had first met in the summer sun of Godric's Hollow. In the dream, they were laughing beneath the orchard trees, their hands brushing as they walked. The wind carried the scent of apples, and for one fleeting heartbeat, all the years between them vanished. Then the dream turned. Shadows crawled over the grass. The air grew cold, and Ariana's laughter, sweet and distant, echoed once before fading away. Gellert reached for him, his eyes full of something unspoken, and Albus woke with his chest aching. It had been months since the news of Gellert's death reached him, but grief does not follow the tidy order of time. It comes and goes like the tide, sometimes gentle, sometimes crushing. That morning, he stood before the mirror of Erised once more. He had avoided it for decades, knowing too well the danger of what it showed. Yet something had drawn him there, an old longing he could no longer suppress. The surface shimmered faintly, clouded at first. Then the mist parted, and there they were, 3 figures standing together in soft sunlight. Ariana smiled up at him, her face free of pain. And beside her stood Gellert, young and unburdened, his eyes bright with that same boundless conviction that had once changed everything. Albus's throat tightened. He reached out, his fingers brushing the cold surface of the glass. "I have spent a lifetime learning not to need what I see here," he whispered. And yet, the reflection smiled, though he could not hear its words. Then, slowly, it faded, leaving only his own face staring back, lined, weary, but not without warmth. He turned away. In the days that followed, the war crept closer. Rumors reached Hogwarts that Voldemort had begun seeking a weapon, an ancient object of power hidden long ago. Albus listened in silence, his mind working in patterns too deep for others to follow. He saw the shape of the threat forming, though he did not yet reveal it. To his students, he remained what he had always been, patient, kind, endlessly wise. To the few who knew him truly, he seemed lonelier than ever. One evening, as the sun set in crimson streaks across the sky, Minerva McGonagall entered his office. "You've been staring out that window for an hour," she said gently. "I was thinking," Albus murmured. "Of him?" He did not answer at once, the firelight caught in his spectacles, hiding his eyes. "Of what we were," he said finally. "Of how much the world can change, and yet how little the heart forgets." Minerva hesitated. "You never spoke of him to anyone, not truly." "There was little to say," he replied softly. "We loved. We dreamed. We destroyed." The simplicity of it broke her heart more than any speech could. When she left, Albus remained by the fire, lost in thought. He could feel time pressing against him now, the years closing like the last pages of a long book. The war would soon demand everything he had left to give. And though he would fight as he always had, for others, for peace, for redemption. He knew that some part of him would always belong to that long-ago summer. That night, he sat at his desk and wrote one final letter. The words came slowly, each one chosen with care. My dear Gellert, if there is a place beyond this one, I hope you have found peace there. You once said that love was a chain, that it bound us, limited us. You were wrong. Love is not a chain, but a thread, invisible and unbreakable, stretching across time itself. I feel it still. Perhaps that is my punishment, or perhaps it is my gift. You taught me brilliance and ruin, wonder and regret. I will not curse your name, for I know too well what we were. You were my greatest mistake, and my greatest truth. Farewell, my friend. Albus. He sealed the letter and placed it beside the others in the wooden box. Then he stood and looked once more at the portraits sleeping along the walls. The ghosts of old headmasters, their faces softened in the glow of candlelight. I wonder, he murmured, if they would have forgiven me, had they known. No portrait stirred, no voice answered. The silence felt like absolution. He turned down the lamps, leaving only the fire to burn through the night. Its flames flickered gold and blue, reflections of two boys who had once believed they could change the world. And perhaps, in their own way, they had. Outside, the first petals of spring fell from the trees, scattering across the lake like snow. The castle slept, unaware of the thoughts that haunted its master. Albus Dumbledore stood at the window until dawn, watching the horizon bloom with light. A new day was coming, one that would bring both victory and death, both promise and farewell. But for now, as the first rays touched the mountains, he allowed himself one final memory. Two young men beneath an orchard sky, laughter in the wind, the taste of beginnings in the air. And though the years had stolen everything else, that moment, bright, fleeting, and eternal, remained untouched, carried like a secret flame in the heart of the world's greatest wizard. The final years of Albus Dumbledore's life unfolded with a slow grace of twilight, the kind of light that is both beautiful and sorrowful because it knows night is coming. Yet, in those years, the old wizard shone brighter than ever, his wisdom and courage guiding the world through another storm. The Second Great War had begun. Once more, fear walked openly in the wizarding world. The name Voldemort, the new shadow born from ambition and cruelty, was spoken only in whispers. Yet Dumbledore did not waver. His calm defiance became a beacon to all who still believed in hope. Within the walls of Hogwarts, he formed the Order of the Phoenix, gathering those brave enough to fight. The castle that had once been a refuge for children now became the quiet heart of resistance. Beneath its stone floors, secret meetings were held, and messages passed like whispers through enchanted mirrors. But even amid the rising war, Albus carried his private burdens. He still walked the corridors at night, as he had always done, the hem of his robes trailing softly behind him. In those hours, when the castle slept and the stars watched in silence, he often found himself thinking of the past, not with the sharp pain of regret, but with a gentler sorrow that time alone can bring. He had made peace with Aberforth, though it had taken decades. They met rarely, but when they did, there was no anger left between them. Their words were few, but their silence was kind. One winter, Albus visited his brother's small pub in Hogsmeade, and they sat by the fire without speaking for hours. When at last Albus rose to leave, Aberforth said, "You did what you had to, Albus. We both did." Albus paused at the door, turning back with a faint smile. "And we both loved her." Aberforth nodded once, his rough hand closing around the mug before him. "That we did." It was a fragile peace, but a real one. And in that quiet understanding, something inside Albus eased at last. Years passed. The war deepened. The boy who had once arrived at Hogwarts as an orphan with messy hair and curious green eyes grew into a young man, Harry Potter, whose life and destiny were tangled with Voldemort's in ways none could yet understand. Albus saw in him not only courage, but innocence, a spark untainted by ambition. It reminded him of what he himself had lost long ago. He guided the boy carefully, teaching him patience, compassion, and the dangerous power of love. "You must believe," he told Harry one evening, "that love is not weakness. It is our greatest strength, perhaps the only one that truly lasts." Harry had looked puzzled then, as young hearts often do. But Albus smiled, knowing the lesson would bloom in its time. That night, after the boy had gone, Dumbledore lingered by the fire. He thought of Gellert, of the passion that had burned between them, fierce and blinding as a star. He wondered what Gellert might have thought of this new age, of this new war. Would he have mocked it, or mourned it? He would never know. Still, sometimes, when the night was especially still, Albus fancied he could feel that same thread between them, the one love had woven, unbroken by death or time. It did not hurt anymore. It was simply there, like the echo of a song too beautiful to forget. The years wore on, and age settled upon him gently but firmly. His once auburn hair turned to silver. His steps slowed, and his hands, though still graceful, trembled faintly when he wrote. Yet his mind remained sharp, and his heart, despite everything, remained kind. Then came the discovery of the Horcruxes, and with them the old fear returned. To destroy Voldemort, the world would have to face once again the dark truth that had haunted Dumbledore's youth, that the lust for immortality is the most dangerous magic of all. It was in pursuit of one such Horcrux that he found the cursed ring. He recognized the symbol engraved upon it instantly. The triangle, the circle, the line, the deathly hallows, their old dream. His and Gellert's. The ring shimmered faintly in the light. In that moment, the years fell away, and he saw himself again, a boy of 19, full of fire, standing beside a golden-haired friend with a vision too vast for the world. Ariana's face flashed before him, followed by Gellert's. For a heartbeat, he felt the same pull he had felt all those years ago, the lure of knowledge, of mastery, of love unfulfilled. But this time, he resisted. He put the ring on only once. That single act sealed his fate. The curse struck swiftly, black veins crawling up his hand like the roots of shadow. Pain flared, but he did not cry out. He knew what it meant. Every gift of death carries its price. When Severus Snape bound the curse to delay it, Albus thanked him softly. "It seems even my old lessons return to me at last," he said with a smile. "We cannot master death. We can only meet it." In the months that followed, he prepared for what must come. He arranged the protection of the boy, the fall of the Dark Lord, and the continuation of the fight. But privately, in the quiet of his nights, he prepared for something else, the moment when he would see Gellert again. not as the dark wizard or the prisoner, but as the boy he had loved. The night before he died, he stood once more at the tower's edge, gazing out across the lake. The moon hung low and full, the wind gentle in his beard. He closed his eyes, breathing deeply of the cold, clean air. "Do you still watch me, Gellert?" he whispered. "After all this time?" He thought he heard laughter on the wind, soft, distant, and familiar. It could have been only memory, or something more. When he turned away from the view, his decision was already made. His death would come soon, and he would meet it as he had lived, without fear and with love still burning quietly in his heart. He slept peacefully that night, dreaming not of war or regret, but of sunlight on green fields and the sound of young laughter drifting through an orchard. And in that dream, two figures walked side by side once more. No guilt, no grief, only the echo of a promise long kept. The end, when it came, was quiet. The world would remember Albus Dumbledore's death as a tragedy, a moment of chaos and betrayal, a fall from the tower that echoed across every corner of the wizarding world. But before that night, before spells were cast and the stars bore witness, there was stillness, a pause between breaths. And in that stillness, Albus had already made his peace. He had known for months what fate awaited him. The curse that marked his hand had crept higher, its shadow spreading slowly through his veins. Every morning, when he woke, he felt its presence humming beneath his skin like a second heartbeat. Yet he did not fear it. Death, he had come to understand, was not an ending, but a passage, a final truth even love could not unmake. The days before that night were filled with small, deliberate acts. He taught his students as if time were infinite, lingering over lessons, smiling when they laughed. He spent long evenings with Minerva McGonagall, discussing school matters and the world's uncertain future. He met with Harry Potter, his chosen pupil, his secret hope, and looked at the boy as one looks at the dawn after a long, dark night. He told Harry everything he could, almost everything, of the Horcruxes, of the task ahead, of the power that had to be destroyed at any cost. But he did not speak of the curse or of his own impending death. He spared the boy that grief. On the final morning, the sky over Hogwarts was grey with mist. Albus watched it from his tower window, the light soft upon his face. In the distance, he could hear the laughter of students on the grounds, unburdened by war, at least for this brief moment. Their innocence was his final triumph. That evening, he left the castle with Harry, travelling across sea and cliff to the cave where one of Voldemort's Horcruxes lay hidden. The journey was long, the air sharp with salt and shadow. Yet even as they crossed into darkness, Albus felt a strange calm. In the cave, he drank the cursed potion that guarded the locket. Each sip was agony, dragging him through memories he wished never to see again. He saw Ariana, broken and small, Aberforth shouting in grief, Gellert turning away in the storm. He saw every failure, every loss that had carved the man he had become. When it was done and the potion drained, he lay trembling against the cold stone. Harry's voice echoed dimly above him, frantic and frightened. Albus reached for the boy's hand. "It's all right," he whispered. "It's all right, my boy." He knew it was not all right, not yet, but it would be, someday. They returned to Hogwarts under a sky streaked with lightning. The storm broke as they arrived. The air was thick with tension, the scent of betrayal near. Albus felt it, knew what awaited him on that tower. He had arranged it all, after all. Severus Snape waited in the shadows below, the reluctant executioner bound by promise and pain. There was no hatred in the plan, only mercy, a mercy born of guilt and necessity. When they reached the astronomy tower, Albus's strength failed him. He leaned upon the wall, breath ragged. Harry, hidden beneath the invisibility cloak by his command, stood frozen as the Death Eaters appeared. Draco Malfoy's wand shook in his hand. The boy's eyes were wide, terrified. Albus looked at him with gentle sorrow. "You are not a killer, Draco," he said softly. "It is not too late to choose differently." Then came Severus. The green light bloomed, bright and final, and the world fell away. For those who watched, it was the end of a great man. For Albus, it was something else entirely. The moment the spell struck, he felt no pain, only release. The world dissolved in a rush of wind and colour, and for the first time in decades, his body was free of the curse, free of weight. He was rising, higher and higher, the tower shrinking beneath him until it was no more than a spark in the dark. Then the light changed, and he was standing once more in the orchard. The air was warm, filled with the scent of apples and summer grass. Sunlight poured through the branches. He looked down at himself, whole, unscarred, young again. The years had fallen from him like dust. And there, beneath the old tree, stood Gellert Grindelwald. He was as Albus remembered him in their youth, bright-eyed, golden-haired, his smile both daring and tender. For a long moment, neither spoke. They simply looked at one another, two souls who had walked through fire and come out the other side. At last, Albus found his voice. "So, it is you," he said softly. Gellert nodded. "And it is you." They stood close, sunlight flickering between them. "I waited," Gellert said, "for this." Albus's breath caught. "I thought you hated me." "I hated what I had done," Gellert said, "and what I made of you. But not you, Albus. Never you." The words fell over him like water, washing away the last of his sorrow. He stepped forward, and Gellert met him halfway. Their hands clasped, and for the first time since that fateful summer, there was no anger between them, only peace. The world around them shimmered, the orchard stretching into endless light. Albus felt warmth bloom in his chest, deeper than any magic he had ever known. "I spent my life trying to atone," he murmured, "for what we did, for what I failed to do." "And you did," Gellert said. "You built what I destroyed. You taught them love, where I taught them fear. We balanced the scales at last." They stood together in silence, the wind whispering through the trees. Somewhere far off, laughter rang, a soft, familiar sound. Albus turned and saw Ariana running through the sunlight, her blue dress rippling like water. She looked back at them, smiling. The ache in his heart vanished. Gellert looked at him with wonder. "She's been waiting too." "Yes," Albus said, his voice breaking with quiet joy. "We all have." They walked toward her side by side, the orchard brightening with every step. The shadows of war, regret, and time faded behind them, leaving only the simple beauty of what once was, and what could finally be again. As the light surrounded them, Albus glanced once more at Gellert. "Do you still believe in the greater good?" he asked with a faint smile. Gellert laughed, the sound warm as sunlight. "No," he said, "only in love." And together they stepped into the light. The light that met them was not blinding, but soft, like dawn after a long night. It wrapped around Albus Dumbledore and Gellert Grindelwald in warmth that seemed both familiar and new. There was no pain, no weight of flesh or fear. The air shimmered with something older than time itself, a peace that belonged to neither heaven nor earth, but somewhere in between. They stood beneath the same apple trees that had shaded their youth, their leaves whispering in an unseen breeze. The grass gleamed like emerald silk, and the scent of summer hung thick upon the air. The orchard stretched endlessly, golden sunlight spilling between the branches, every ray alive with memory. For a long while, neither spoke. The years that had once stood between them, the wars, the guilt, the grief, seemed to melt away in the quiet. It was as if time had exhaled and finally gone still. Albus turned to him, his gaze steady. "It feels as though no time has passed at all." Gellert smiled faintly. "And yet it has. A lifetime. 2 lifetimes, perhaps." He looked down at his hands, whole again, unmarked by the ravages of age or battle. "I thought I had forgotten what this felt like." "You were waiting," Albus said softly. "You always were." Gellert's golden eyes met his. "Not for redemption, for you." The words fell into the air, simple and true. Albus felt them settle deep within him, touching the part of his soul that had never truly healed. He reached out, hesitant, as if afraid that the vision might dissolve. But Gellert did not fade. Their hands met, and the warmth of that touch felt more real than any spell, any power they had once sought. They began to walk through the orchard, their footsteps stirring the grass, but leaving no mark. Overhead, the sunlight filtered through the leaves, painting patterns upon their faces. It was quiet, save for the hum of the wind, a peaceful sound that seemed to speak in whispers of forgiveness. "I spent my life trying to atone," Albus said after a while. "For Ariana, for us, for everything that followed. I thought if I did enough good, perhaps the past would release me." "Did it?" Gellert asked gently. Albus shook his head. "No, the past does not release us, but it teaches." Gellert smiled faintly. "You always were the better philosopher." "I don't know about that," Albus murmured. "Once I thought philosophy could heal what love had broken. And now?" "Now," he said quietly, "I know that love was the only truth we ever found." They stopped beneath the oldest tree in the orchard, the one whose roots had been their throne in youth, where they had dreamed of remaking the world. Its bark was silver now, glimmering faintly as though light lived within it. Gellert ran his fingers over the trunk. "Do you remember what we said here? That we would change everything?" "I remember," Albus said. "And in a way, we did." A soft laugh escaped Gellert's lips. "Not as we intended." "No," Albus agreed. "But perhaps the world we dreamed of needed to be broken before it could be made right." They sat beneath the tree, the branches swaying above them. For the first time since that long-ago summer, there was no urgency between them, no fire demanding to be fed. Only calm and the unspoken understanding that all debts had been paid. Gellert leaned back against the trunk, his eyes half closed. "Do you think they'll remember us kindly, Albus?" Albus smiled, faint and wistful. "History will remember what it chooses. It always does." "And you?" Albus looked out over the horizon, where the light touched the fields like gold. "I will remember us truly. That's all that matters now." Gellert turned his head to study him. You forgive me then? There was nothing left to forgive, Albus said, only to understand. The wind sighed through the trees, scattering petals that drifted like snow around them. The orchard shimmered, brighter now, as though the world itself breathed in their peace. A figure appeared at the edge of the clearing. Ariana, her face serene, her eyes clear as starlight. She approached silently, her white dress fluttering. When she reached them, she smiled, a smile without sorrow. "Are you ready?" she asked softly. Albus rose, his throat tight with emotion. "I think I have been for a very long time." Gellert stood as well, his expression calm, his eyes glinting with something like joy. "Then let's not keep eternity waiting." Ariana took each of their hands. Light gathered around her, gentle but radiant, and the orchard began to dissolve into brilliance. The trees faded first, their leaves turning to silver dust. Then the ground beneath them gave way to a boundless, luminous plain. In that moment, Albus felt every weight lift. The burden of guilt, the ache of longing, even the shadow of fear. Everything that had once divided him was gone. All that remained was the thread of love, running through every moment of his life, now shining clear and unbroken. He looked at Gellert one last time, though he knew this was not truly an ending. "It's strange," he said, "to think that after all we have done, it comes to this, peace." Gellert's smile deepened. Perhaps this was what we were seeking all along. Their fingers intertwined. The light around them swelled, soft and endless. The orchard, the sky, the very air became one great sea of golden warmth. Albus closed his eyes. For a moment, he felt as though he stood within the very heart of magic itself, pure, unbound, infinite. When he opened them again, there was no more separation, no more past or future. The three of them walked together across the horizon, their forms dissolving into the light until nothing remained but harmony. Far below, in the living world, the wind rustled through the trees outside Hogwarts. The old castle stood silent beneath the moon, its towers silvered in the pale glow. Somewhere in the headmaster's office, a wooden box lay upon a shelf, its lid slightly open. Inside rested three things: a letter yellowed by time, a slender wand, and a silver locket shaped like a heart. The candle beside it flickered, and for the briefest instant it seemed to burn with golden fire, then steadied and went still. Outside, the dawn broke. The sky blushed with light, and a new day began. And though the world would remember Albus Dumbledore as the greatest wizard who ever lived, somewhere beyond the veil of time, he was simply a man at peace, walking once more through an endless orchard with the only person who had ever truly understood him.